The heretics think that the Knight is their ally. They are mistaken. It is ours. These are the words of probably one of the most effective warbands seen within the forces of New Antioch, the Stahl Troopin of Free Prussia. Free Prussia is probably one of the most, if not the most needed states in the faithful front against hell. It is also probably one of the most distrusted, as they have a different form of government to most of the faithful nations, and are seen as alien to many of the leaders, though they have to accept it for now due to the services the Prussians provide. So greetings, guardsmen and yeomen. As you can tell, today we're talking about the Free Prussians, and their forces they bring to New Antioch, the different weapons, and their history. So let us begin by getting into some of the backstory of the State of Free Prussia itself. Within Trench Crusade, the State of Free Prussia formed its Reichstag or Congress in order to leave the Holy Roman Empire, which was still the unholy Germanic hot mess of the 1,000 states and bishoprics that we know for it being in our own timeline, though it had much more power within Trench Crusade, with it being the main force of the faithful and the main supplier of men and material to the Crusade. It's even stated that the Holy Roman Emperor has near equal power upon the Council of Princes to that of the papal legate themselves. The people of Free Prussia, once they voted to leave to make their own nation, found that they really liked the autonomy that democracy provided and decided to keep their Reichstag. This, of course, freaked out the members of the Church High Command and the Council of Princes, since most nations were kingdoms with absolute monarchs. So the idea of a government by the people and for the people was strange at best and an invitation for heresy at worst. Now, the State of Free Prussia actually existed in reality. Formed in the aftermath of World War I, it would become one of the first semi-independent states during the collapse of the German Empire. It would actually have almost full autonomy as its own nation, though it would be a major player within the Weimar Republic, becoming one of the most open democracies in the world at the time, with a heavy emphasis on social inclusion and academics. From universities and institutes within its borders studying everything from astronomy, physics, warfighting, and even gender studies, placing Germany at the forefront of technological and intellectual advancement. The Free State of Prussia could even be considered even more stable than that of the Weimar Republic, though a crisis in 1932 and a coup organized by Franz von Papen completely destroyed the Free State's autonomy, allowing it to be completely controlled by the Nazi Party. It would become the last obstacle destroyed by Hitler in his rise to power, with him putting Hermann Göring in charge of the Free State in 1933, where it would act as mostly a puppet state until the collapse of the Third Reich in 1945, where it would be dissolved in 1947 by the Soviets. Though there is a major diversion with the formation of the Free Prussian state. While on our timeline it forms in 1918, after the Treaty of Versailles and the collapse of the German Empire, within Trench Crusade it's 1914, and Free Prussia exists, and has for several years at least. And this leads to a different origin story for Free Prussia. And in my opinion, that is the revolutions of 1848. The revolutions of 1848 were a pro-democracy and nationalistic movement that spread all across Europe in 1848, and particularly spread within the former states of the HRE as a movement to form a unified German state. This is actually where we get the famous German tricolor from. While not effective and stamped down by the monarchs of the time, they did make some concessions, particularly in Prussia. And despite the apprehension from their king, Frederick Wilhelm, he was willing to compromise to form a congress, as long as he could run it. It'd be this Reichstag that many of Germany's political leaders got their start, most notably Otto von Bismarck, and would be the first steps at a unified German nation. Within Trench Crusade, these 1848 revolutions, in my opinion, had a much greater effect on Prussia, with them being able to form their Reichstag and voting themselves independent. They literally voted to leave the HRE as its first vote, which has surprisingly worked, as you wouldn't expect a nation like the Holy Roman Empire to be really cool with their most prosperous and well-armed nation just walking out of their coalition. Though with the clusterfuck that is the HRE in both timelines, they probably weren't able to muster that much of a force to bring them back into the fold. Plus the Pope more than likely intervened to prevent any form of civil wars when you still had their war with hell to deal with. We also have the Free State's connection to the Teutonic Order Knights. Within our own timeline, the Knights, along with Poland, conducted the Northern Crusades and kicked many of the pagans occupying Prussia out of the territory. And in fact, it would be a Grand Master of the Order that would officially establish the province under Poland's rule. I believe something similar happened within Trench Crusade as well, with the Northern Crusades kicking out the heretics occupying the region. We actually see this with many of the noble families of Free Prussia having connections to the Order, where it is seen as a point of pride to have this connection. With the map that was provided to us with Trench Crusade, we can clearly see that the Teutonic Order still carries a sizable amount of territory. The Order is either heavily aligned with the Free Prussians to allow for this mixing of nobility, or more similar to our own timeline, the Teutonic Order and the Free State have completely combined, with the Order Knights being part of Free Prussia. Though we do have to wait for the full release of the Trench Crusade book to really know for sure. With this map, we also can see pretty much the entirety of Europe and the Levant, along with North Africa. And this leads to one major question. How big is Free Prussia? When looking at the map, it shows every faithful nation currently in the Crusade, with one major exception. Where Prussia? The Free State itself is not listed on this map. Many people point to the areas around Potsdam. This is the traditional province of Prussia, and would contain Königsberg according to its size. Though personally, I do not think this is the extent of the Free Prussian state. Going off the examples provided in the artwork and the lore on the Free Prussians, along with real-world connections, I believe that the State of Prussia is much bigger than what is provided in the map. In fact, I believe it's more along the lines of the North German Confederation, or the Free Prussian state in our own timeline, and there are many examples to this. One major one is to simply look at the Prussian forces. In fact, if you look at the Stahl Troopin and Garde Corps members and their artwork, we can see that they do not have the same symbol to that of the city crest of Potsdam. Within the map, this city crest is red with a yellow background, and when looking at it from our point of view, the eagle is facing to the right. While when you look at the eagles on the armor of the Stahl Troopin, they're a complete different eagle, with that eagle's head facing towards the left, and many of their symbols being a black eagle on a yellow background. In fact, it's very similar to that of the HRE's own eagle. Though the symbol we see on the map is much more just the German eagle rather than the HRE symbol, but closely resembles the symbols seen on the Free Prussians. Meaning that possibly that symbol is not the HRE, but Free Prussia. Another major example is that we know that the Prussians control the city of Cologne, or for my fellow English speakers, the city of Cologne, which is actually located on the other side of Germany from where the Prussian territory is located, and in the heart of the Rhine-Ruhr Valley. The Prussians control the city due to sacrosanct workshops beneath the Cologne Cathedral, and this makes a possibility that the Prussians control the entirety of the Rhine-Ruhr Valley, with the Holy Roman Empire very intent on winning back this territory from the Free Prussians. Though they are stopped by the Pope, as the Prussians provide a lot to the war effort, and they do not need a war in their own backyards. And this could lead to why the Free Prussians have such high industrial output and reserves of orichalcum, as the Rhine-Ruhr Valley is the industrial heartland of Germany, with vast waves of factories, and is known to have a large proportion of the orichalcum reserves in the faithful nations. But why is Prussia's size so reduced on the map? There is actually several reasons for this. Notably, the Free Prussians are not the most well-liked country, especially on the Council of Princes, as many believe that the nation is open to heretical interference due to the style of government of Free Prussia. They don't have a king, or in the case of the HRE, the emperor. They also took a sizable portion of HRE territory and most of its industrial capacity during the breakup. And for many of these kings and queens, they don't want their peoples, especially in their multicultural nations, getting any ideas. There is also the simple idea that this map is old, and Free Prussia is a new kingdom, or state in this case, meaning that they just haven't had time to update the maps. Sometimes there isn't really a conspiracy, but believe what you want to believe. The Free State also controls probably the largest R&D facility within Europe. The Institutes of War and Metallurgy located in the city of Königsberg bring the brightest minds of the faithful together to produce the modern weapons we see among faithful forces. It's here weapons like the Thompson, BAR, anti-material rifles, auto shotguns, and specialized MIR grenades are produced. These institutes are even responsible for the myriad of war machines produced by the faithful, designing weapons such as the heavy mechanized infantry, to vehicles such as tanks and armored cars, providing the lion's share of these types of vehicles, to even mechanized walkers, like the anchorite shrines for the trench pilgrim processions, and supposedly 30-foot walkers that defend the walls of New Antioch itself. The three things that define the Free Prussians are military tradition, industrial might, and intellectual prowess, and is the entire reason why the state's even allowed to exist in the first place, as many nations are gunning for them, though the Pope himself has decreed that no one messes with the Free Prussians, as they provide the lion's share of men and material to not only New Antioch, but every front line that the faithful nations have. The Pope does not want this messed with. There is also the teeny tiny fact that the Prussian state is one of, if not the most heavily defended nations in all of Europa, with the largest land army containing the most advanced weaponry and armor known to mortal men. It wouldn't be the smartest move to have this spear point pointed away from the heretics to your own throat. Now that we've gone over a general overview of the Free State of Prussia itself, let's go into some of their units, the specialized units that make up their armies and warbands. Now keep in mind, the Prussian land army is one of the largest of the faithful nations, with forces both fighting the Northern Crusades against the Northern heretics, alongside the Teutonic Order, Finland, and Russia, while sending their best troops, the specialized Stormtrooper, to assist New Antioch as part of the tithe. The first of these units we'll talk about is the mainline troopers that we see among New Antioch forces, the Stahl Troopin. The Stahl Troopin of Free Prussia are a near one-to-one comparison, for the most part, to the historical storm battalions of the Imperial German Army during the First World War. After the failure of the Schlieffen Plan and the start of trench warfare in 1914, German warplanners quickly began to realize that they needed a specialized unit to create gaps in enemy lines. The first precursors to the Storm battalions began to appear on the battlefield in 1915. Led by commanders Willy Rohr and Captain Redmond, these precursors to the Stormtroopers were well known for their shock tactics, and used heavily in the Eastern Theater, the East being known more as a war of maneuver compared to the trench warfare growing on the Western Front. The effectiveness of the Stormtroopers was not ignored by German High Command, and Rohr's unit was transferred to the Western Front in 1916 as part of the Battle of Verdun, where they had formed the official Sturmabteilung, or Storm Regiments, and would be combined to form the first Storm Battalions in mid-1916. Recruits to the Storm Battalions were required to be 25 years of age or younger, and recruited particularly from the more athletic and aggressive members of German personnel. These included track and field athletes, boxers, mountaineers, and swimmers. The Storm Battalions requiring men that are willing to sprint across no man's land and to engage in hand-to-hand combat. These recruits would be formed into small units and heavily trained in infiltration and trench raiding tactics. Their attacks would come in the early morning hours or at dusk, where their enemy would be the most vulnerable to attack. Unlike the most of the German army, and most armies of the First World War for that matter, the Stormtroopers were allowed to effectively fight on their own, getting grand objectives from German High Command, but allowing their NCOs to take direct command and find a way to achieve that objective, developing mission tactics on the fly and leading through direct command. This was a very novel idea for the time, as most armies operated in a top-down command structure, requiring NCOs to get direct orders from their high command to conduct even the smallest battlefield operation, greatly reducing their effectiveness. This allowed the Stahl Troopin to change their tactics on the fly if needed, and to take advantage of battlefield changes. Stormtroopers were taught to attack in combination of multiple weapon systems and units, from Jaegers armed with sniper rifles, to the Pioneers and their flamethrowers, to both trench mortar and machine gun crews, and of course the famous Grenadier teams. Men covered in bread bags filled with Stickhandgranatas and other forms of German hand grenades, and taught in close quarters fighting and the use of multiple different weapon systems, from their standard issue Mauser 98K a shorter version of the standard rifle of the German army, to the more experimental like the MP-18, produced in small numbers right at the end of the war, specifically for the Stormtroopers. Stormtrooper units were even taught in the use of captured enemy weapons. The encirclement tactics of the Stahl Troopin were greatly feared by the Entente powers, and were used to great effect during the spring offensives of 1918 and the Kaiserschlacht, the last major offensive of the First World War. The Stahl Troopin of Free Prussia are extremely similar to the real-world Stormtroopers. In fact, their recruitment practices and tactics are near one-to-one. For the recruitment processes, they typically recruit men under the age of 25, and even in a nation known for their militaristic ways, the Stahl Troopin are elite, and are chosen from mountaineers and veterans of the fierce battles against the northern heretics. Recruited from the cream of the Combat Engineering Corps, marksmen, and shock troopers. They are typically known as the Duke's Spears, for their speciality of piercing the enemy lines and clearing paths for the reserves. The training and selection process is ruthless. Athleticism is emphasized, as is the ability of rapid advancement over any kind of terrain, and learning how to make use of both camouflage and even the tiniest bit of terrain for cover. They learn to hit their targets in near total darkness, and train wrestling hulking communicants to better their hand-to-hand combat skills. Though the most important selection criteria is to have iron in your soul. Unlike the real-world Stormtroopers, these men are to engage the armies of the damned in close-quarters combat, requiring a certain kind of soldier, one who is willing to detonate their last grenade when their own innards have been ritten apart by the claws of a werewolf, to wrestle down a heretical anointed, and to look in their eyes, seeing the hellfires raging, and not flinch as they bring their trench club down, to brush off the wails of a chorister, to feel no fear from the different monsters of the Path of the Beast, as they break through heretical trench lines, cutting through the sentient barbed wire, and blowing up heretical casemates. A Stahl Troopin will finish the job no matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice. This is what separates the Stahl Troopin from your standard New Antioch soldier. As for their assault tactics, when the Stormtroopin gather for an attack, no sound is heard. Each assault has been carefully practiced, for weeks on end, either in the early morning hours or late at dusk. Any signs given are given in hand signals as they slowly approach the enemy positions. Soon, artillery bombardments pound the heretical forces. Heavy weapons units armed with machine guns, and even the occasional heavy mechanized infantry, send the enemy forces scattering to take cover. Then it's a mad dash. Violence commences as flamethrowers sweep the exposed enemies, followed by flurries of grenades and satchel charges into the trenches and dugouts, carried in bundles by the Stahl Troopin. The assault groups spread out like the wings of an eagle, clearing the trenches, sweeping behind enemy lines, and disabling any and all forms of communication, as well as any rearguard defensive units that pop their heads out, completely overwhelming the enemy. And finally, close quarters fighting commences. In these fights, the Stahl Troopin favor daggers, trench clubs, and entrenching tools. Though far and above their favorite weapon in close quarters fighting is the grenade, carried with them in great quantities, much like their real-world counterparts. These grenades would be used to take out strong points, as well as reach behind the loopholes of guns and clearing out entrances to bunkers and pillboxes. As for ranged weaponry, submachine guns and pistols are highly favored, and feature many modifications compared to the standard issue versions, typically with the addition of larger magazines, as the brutal close-quarters combat can deplete ammunition very rapidly. Types of submachine guns seen are Thompsons, Hellriegels, and MP-18s, all armed with extended drum mags. The Stahl Troopin also make heavy use of the auto shotgun, a drum-to-mag shotgun capable of additional firepower, though prone to jamming, personally designed by the Prussian Institute of War within Königsberg. The specialized units of the Stahl Troopin make heavy use of the MG-08-15 for their light machine gun crews, the Maxim 1910 for their mechanized infantry, Wex flamethrowers for their pioneers, and scoped 98Ks for their marksmen. The Stahl Troopin are also seen with a wide variety of pistols, but most notably the Mauser C96 broomhandle and the P08 Luger, both standard issue sidearms of the German military, and both being heavily modified with drum magazines rather than those typical box mags. Stahl Troopin uniforms reflect their role, equipped with mountain boots and leather-reinforced jackets, and trousers that protect their vital areas against barbed wire and enemy blades. Their armor contains far higher quantities of orichalcum than those of the standard foot soldier. This allows for much lighter and more flexible suits and helmets, which offer superior protection. The famed spikes on their Pickelhaube helmets are entirely detachable, and are usually not worn within the front lines, as it makes their wearers easy targets. The Pickelhaube being the standard issue infantry helmet of the German military during the early days of World War I, and were originally designed to blunt cavalry blades, hence the spikes, though did not provide any protection and would be quickly replaced with the Stahlhelm in 1915, being one of the first modern-day helmets produced for the war. These are not the only forces the Prussians bring in their warbands, however. The nobility of the Free State can be seen nothing more than a ceremonial role, keeping the ideals of military noble tradition alive within Prussia. As no longer do they hold sway over the common man, each citizen able to vote for a representative in the Landtag to decide state affairs. The nobles are still granted some rights and privileges, most notably being able to pick the unit they wish to serve in while in the military, as conscription is still the law of the land, and can bypass many of the gender roles of the time, as the Prussians are still a very male-centric society. The nobility also has the funds to buy officer commissions, maintaining that the officer corps is still heavily inundated with the nobility. For the more adventurous and determined members of the nobility, one unit stands out, a force created to counter the armored threats of hell, the Garde Corps. The heretic forces lead the faithful in the arms race of tanks and other armored vehicles. They are heavily armored, fast-moving, and are often armed with the terrifying Hell-forged sacrilege-type tank mortar. To counter these armored threats that have been used time and again to break through their lines, the Prussians have developed many battlefield innovations, from the anti-material rifle to specialized close-quarter Garde Corps units. As the sacrilege cannons are slow-firing and hard to aim, the Prussians counter them with lightning-fast close-quarters tactics. For these tactics, the swords of the Garde Corps, commonly called tank splitters, are specifically designed to disable or destroy enemy armored vehicles. Developed by the Prussian Institutes of Metallurgy, their edges are made of orichalcum and a titanium alloy, and are near monomolecular blades that can cut through vehicle tracks and armor with ease, disabling them while the rest of the unit swarms the tank with incendiary grenades. With these tactics, speed is of the essence. The heretics are well aware of this tactic and seek to counter such attacks with their own elite legionaries. These legionnaires compete with each other in capturing rather than killing the specialist Stahl Troopin, so they can be sold to the agents of the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent as punishment for their audacity. The sword itself appears to be designed off of an executioner's sword. The executioner's sword was never meant to be used in combat, being designed for, as the name implies, executions, and was considered the more noble way of going out. The sword is normally seen in the office of the magistrate, seen as the symbol of that office, until the execution of a noble or a high-status individual is called for. The sword allows the condemned person to sit in a praying formation, with their head facing up towards the sky, towards the Almighty, allowing them to beg for their forgiveness. When a more common man is put to the axe, they're face down, towards damnation. The executioner's sword is not designed for combat. There is no tip to the weapon, making it impossible to thrust with. It is also heavier than your normal longsword, with the entire blade being completely flat, making it very unruly when wielded. Though the sides are razor sharp for cutting, which makes it very effective against chopping heads, or within Trench Crusade, armored plate. The vast majority of the members of the Garde Corps are selected from the nobility, as they are able to volunteer for any position that they want. Many units of the Prussian army disallow women in combat units, but the scions of noble lineage often exercise their privilege in joining any regiment they wish. These nobles are often in handcrafted armor by their personal armorers, and unlike the mass-produced suits of the rank and file, it allows for sufficient speed and mobility. The training of the Garde Corps is not too dissimilar to that of the standard Stahl Troopin, though with heavy emphasis in anti-armor warfare. They also use Menser dueling. Menser dueling is used to assess the required bravery of candidates for tank splitter units, and is quite the interesting variation of fencing. Unlike the other forms of fencing that we see around Europe, that being Olympic, HEMA, and even Bohurt, where the goal is to break through your opponent's defense and score a hit before resetting, or in the case of Bohurt, knocking the ever-living shit out of your opponent until they fall to the ground, Menser was a disciplinary style of fencing. The goal was not to win the battle through points, but to prove your manhood and discipline. This style of fencing became extremely popular across Prussia, particularly in the universities and institutes of the state, with many Menser fraternities being set up. At the time, it consists of two individuals swinging their sabers above their head, trying to cut their faces. This was a way to show that you wouldn't back down from a fight, and you would look your opponent dead in the eye, no matter the danger. There also was the added bonus of when you eventually got hit, it produced what was known as a Menser scar. These Menser scars were a sign of pride among the German officer class and nobility. It showed that you were willing to take a hit and damage your face or body, but keep your discipline. In fact, the closer it was to, say, your eye or another vital organ, the more prestige you earned, and there was many cases where these fraternities would serrate their blades or even add fishhooks to produce deeper and more sizable scars, as these were also signs of prestige. Though, rather hilariously, if you ever look at any traditional photos, videos, or people practicing Menser, everyone are wearing a bunch of armor. Even in the traditional photos, everything but their face is covered. As even though Menser is all about discipline and holding your ground and getting hit, we are still human, and having a sword flying at your face is absolutely terrifying. There's also the added fact of the Menser scar being probably one of the most stereotypical "this is an evil German officer" looks in games and movies. Seriously, take a look at everything from Call of Duty to movies like James Bond, and your villain, as long as they're German, usually has a Menser scar. The last of the specialized units we'll be talking about with the Free State is that of their trench clerics. The trench cleric, better known in the Free State as the field chaplains, are dispatched by the church militant of Free Prussia to do battle against heretical priests and warlocks, to face down choristers, and to be a paragon of virtue, pitting their faith against their demonic powers. Alongside conducting sermons, funerals, and many other duties of the faithful. To this end, demonic lords have put a high price on their heads for their death, or even capture. Internal torment awaits if they succeed. It is for this reason that the Church and the Free State go to extraordinary lengths to equip their chaplains with some of the finest weapons and armor. Chaplains had a major role within the First World War. They dealt with the mental and spiritual health of the men they served with, from running field masses to providing comfort during bombardment or after engagements, through overseeing the funerals and last rites of mortally wounded soldiers. They also conducted acts of bravery, rescuing the wounded and recovering the bodies of the fallen from no man's land. A notable example of this is 3 chaplains for the United States Army. Chaplain Duffy, Chaplain Gerhardt, and Chaplain O'Flaherty would all earn the Distinguished Service Cross for their bravery under fire. The Distinguished Service Cross was the second highest award in the U.S. military, just below the Medal of Honor. They earned these for braving machine gun fire and poison gas to save their fellow wounded soldiers and to recover the fallen. Notably, the actions of Chaplain Duffy would be enshrined in the movie The Fighting 69th in the 1950s. And Chaplain O'Flaherty was observed by the 82nd Infantry Regiment to have buried 7 men on his own, so they can remain identified and preserved for proper burial once the unit moved out. Unfortunately for Chaplain O'Flaherty, he would not survive the war, and would be killed as he accompanied his regiment over the top. Chaplain O'Flaherty was not alone. Many frontline chaplains accompanied their men into battle. There they provided comfort, from psalms and hymns under fire, to aid to the wounded and identification of the dead. Many of these chaplains would go completely unarmed, France being the big exception, as they would arm their chaplains with rifles. To the French nation, you were a rifleman first, and a chaplain second. Many chaplains would die in these engagements, giving their lives to save their fellow soldiers. Though the Sacred Service was not without its controversies, particularly within the German military, as the Chaplain Corps was woefully understaffed. with some records, particularly from Bavaria, stating that one Catholic priest would have over 1,600 men under his service. This led to many of the services that were provided by the chaplain corps of other nations to be completely missing from the German military, with only so-called emergency services being provided. Most of these included funerals and sermons given at the regimental level, far behind the front lines, and of course the specialized sermons and prayers given to the high-ranking officer corps. Many German chaplains didn't even visit the front lines and were completely oblivious to the status of the war. This increased at the latter half of World War I, with most chaplains being unaware of the growing resentment to the German Empire and brewing revolution. Now within Trench Crusade, the job of a chaplain is tenfold. Not only are you there to do the standard duties of running masses and conducting funerals, you're also there to assist the men on the front lines in their time of need. This is still an artilleryman's war, day in and day out bombardments, trench mortars, poison gas, and the scything sounds of machine guns hound the men's dreams. There is also the added issue that this is a literal war against hell, meaning that the horrors of war have never horrored like this before. This is a conflict where literal demons prowl the trench lines. Headless corpses wail the reverse words of the gospel, and how everybody is going to die and be internally tormented in lakes of fire. PTSD can manifest into someone transforming into a werewolf or another horrid beast, to even minor horrors such as sentient barbed wire dragging men into the mud, never to rise again. The chaplains themselves are not immune to these threats. Due to the importance of their role, a high blood price has been placed on the head of each chaplain by heretical commanders, a price that has been doubled by the demonic Lord Mammon for capture, as these priests are prime material in constructing Goetic warlocks. It's for this very reason that the field chaplains have some of the most advanced armor and weapons ever to be fielded by the Free State, forged by hand in the sacrosanct workshops beneath the Cologne Cathedral for each individual field chaplain. These suits are almost pure orichalcum, the divine metal, allowing them to be enhancedly protected against all threats, mortal or demonic, and allow for enhanced mobility. These armored suits hold a dual purpose: inspiration for the men on the front lines. Many of these armored suits are designed to mirror those of ancient heroes and knights of old. They appear as living angels or Teutonic knights, coming to drive away the demons. To this end, many chaplains would even don specialized carvings or symbols upon their armor, not too dissimilar to the Teutonic knights. They would be seen with horns, hands clasped in prayer, crowns, and many other different designs of the Free State and the militant god the Lion. These are both to inspire the faithful and to terrify the heretics. Now there's even historical precedent to this, as historical paintings depict many knights showing symbols upon their armor, either to intimidate their enemies or to show off in tournaments, with many of the secular knights donning symbols of their houses, be it horns, antlers of varying animals, ships, and even dragons. And the more militant orders, especially the Teutonic Order, donning horns and holy symbols upon campaigns, though there's not much evidence to these being used in actual combat, as most of these would be made out of paper mache or leather, and would fit the tournament grounds and as an intimidation tactic rather than upon the battlefield. In fact, much of these symbols are extremely ornate and sizable, and would be a hindrance to the knight in combat. To this end, most of these historical paintings depict these accoutrements being removed from the knight by a squire just prior to the battle. This dual purpose even extends into the field chaplain's weapons, as the standard issue melee weapon of the field chaplain is a sword, and sometimes these blades are fashioned after the burning blade carried by the angel that protected the Garden of Eden, while others are smaller copies of the brands carried by the paladins. They also carry specialized grenades filled with myrrh, hemlock, and burning incense, and some classified unknown substances. When detonated, these shrapnel of these grenades scatter embers that rapidly burn through anything caught in the blast. Their designs even mirror that of smaller cathedrals themselves. These armaments allow the chaplains to accompany their men directly into combat, fighting side by side, inspiring them with hymn and scripture, along with extreme acts of bravery, dueling heretical priests, taking down werewolves and anointed, and silencing choristers without even flinching. They're aided in this insane bravery not just through their religious zeal, but through a specialized chemical known as holy smoke, one that shares many similarities to the chemical compounds found within martyrdom pills, and one that has led to repeated reprimands of frontline chaplains due to the repeated overuse, as it is known for many intensive side effects. Martyrdom pills are a potent mixture of mind-altering drugs and chemicals that endure a soldier against pain and injury. However, they can take a tremendous toll on the body. Some of their side effects include enhanced aggression and paranoia, and the lack of being able to sleep. This drug is also extremely addictive, with many soldiers entering hospice for overuse and overdose. There is actually a close real-world comparison to martyrdom pills, that being Pervitin. Pervitin was a pill designed by the German military initially for the Blitzkrieg. In fact, this is actually how the Blitzkrieg was even able to be operated so effectively, with men being able to stay awake for days on end with increased endurance and aggression. If you want to know how tanks blitzed the Low Countries in France, it was Pervitin. One major part about Pervitin, though, it's crystal meth. Literal crystal meth pills. The men of the Blitzkrieg were high the entire time, and this led to intensive problems. One notable example of this is a Waffen-SS unit late in the war. They were maintaining a fortress around the city of Königsberg, and to deal with their stress, they took their entire supply of Pervitin. Naturally, an entire company filled with people high on meth is never a good thing, and upon hearing a twig snap in the forests, this unit decided, oh god, the forest is speaking Cyrillic, and unloaded every single round of ammunition they had. It was not the Russians. The Russians, in fact, showed up 2 days later, and the German force surrendered. There is also the famous story of Imo Kovinen, the Finnish soldier that was lost in the woods from his unit and was chased down by Russians. Deciding to take a Pervitin pill to stay awake, he found out that the entire unit's pills had fused together. Throwing all caution to the wind, this galaxy brain decided to take the entire supply of Pervitin at once, an entire platoon's worth of crystal meth, and then proceeded to somehow not die in an overdose, and wake up about 1 to 2 weeks later covered in blood that was not his own in the middle of a Russian minefield, having eaten multiple birds, survived both grenades and landmines, and shot at by multiple Russian platoons. Crystal meth is one hell of a drug. You can also see the problem within Trench Crusade. Having your chaplain being high on crystal meth 24/7 is probably not the best idea. While they're probably a monster on the battlefield, able to shrug off wounds and fight continuously, with no fear, it doesn't really help when you have somebody who's already paranoid, to say a death commando or some other random demon is hiding around the corner to kidnap them, is now high on meth and hallucinating. This can lead to some unfortunate outcomes. There's also the added issue of just trying to report to these men, or having them show up for an assault, because not only are they taking crystal meth, they're taking an aerosol version, meaning that the poor messenger has to wear a gas mask to even approach their chapel, or risk ODing before they even reach the front door. This chemical dependency also wastes them away slowly, as thousands are in the New Antioch hospice due to complications due to overdosing and extended use of this drug. And finishing off the chaplain here, we've reached our end of the discussion of Free State of Prussia. We've gone over their territories, their histories, real-world connections, and specialized units, along with a good amount of speculation on a lot of it as well. I want to thank you guys for sticking around this long if you did. And if you did and you're new here, you like what I do, please like and subscribe. Maybe even leave a comment on just what you like more. I'm very interested in this, and especially World War I, as it's an area, particularly in the United States, that's not discussed as much, and I'm very glad Trench Crusade kind of brings more of the stories of World War I to life in this alternate reality. It's also part of the reason why these might take a little bit longer, as I'm trying to bring in more research, getting it correct for you guys, and to bring some fantastical stories. I'm going to keep my nose to the grindstone and find some more stuff for you here in Trench Crusade, and maybe even branch out into some other units and stories of other worlds and their world connections. There's some interesting stuff with the Guardsmen as well. So, again, thank you all for sticking with me and being patient, and I hope you all have a great day. I gotta get back to the archives now.